Hey everyone, Julian here. I just wanted to say before we get into today's episode that while transferring the files over after recording, the video unfortunately became corrupted, so this episode will be audio only. Thank you and enjoy my conversation with Max.
Community planning to myself, I would say, is about long-term processes, initiatives, and opportunities. It basically focuses on questions like how, when, and where we can see the growth happening in our communities, how we can make it happen realistically possible within the next, say, 5, 10, or 20 years from now on.
Welcome back to the workshop presented by Aplin Martin. On today's episode, I'm joined by Max Rast, the program manager of the Community Planning and GIS group. Having over 12 years of professional experience, Max and I recount his time in both Canada and Russia and his transition from the public to the private consulting side. With the evolution of GIS technology, municipal policies, and public engagement, Max dives into the world of community planning and how it shapes his vision for the department within Aplin Martin. It's great to hear him share his personal journey, stories within the industry, and vision for the future, and I hope you all enjoy. Before we get into the actual topic of community planning today, if you want to give me a brief background about yourself, where'd you grow up, where'd you go to school, how many years of experience do you have in the industry?
For sure. So I was born and raised in one of the coldest places on Earth, city of Yakutsk. It's basically located in north far east of Siberia, out of Russia. I've lived there before I turned 18, and then I had to move to China, and I basically wanted to pursue education in China. I did my undergrad in there. It was basically English, Chinese bilingual program, which is really different from what I do these days. Yeah,
No kidding.
exactly. So unfortunately, my father got really seriously ill, and I had to get home back to support my mother because he eventually passed away. And I decided to fill in his footsteps in the industry because he was an engineer. So I became an engineer, a third generation engineer in our family.
Oh, very cool. So when did you move to Canada then after all of that?
Yeah, so I moved to Canada in 2018.
Okay.
So I finished my undergrad in my hometown university. I finished a civil engineering degree there, and then I also was doing my master's program in there for urban planning.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
So you could say then that, I guess like you mentioned before, your father was your motivation for kind of getting into the field, and that's kind of where you learned about it.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, as I mentioned before, I got into this really from really different field because I was more about languages, cultural differences and, identities of the countries, right? And then eventually I was got into engineering. It was so hard for me to get back into this kind of mindset of engineer or a planner. But eventually I got there, I got my degree, and then eventually I got employed. And now I have maybe 13, 14 years of experience so far. Wow. Yeah.
So moving from Russia to China and then to Canada, and like you mentioned before, the languages and all that, how was language almost as a barrier? Was it difficult to because you're almost learning a language and then you have to not only do that, but then convert the language to the actual, like you said, the engineering or the planning or that part of the discipline? How, can you expand on that a little bit?
Thinking way back then, because it was how many years ago, almost 8 years ago since I moved here. And I was all over the place in Canada. I was in Calgary and Brampton, then Victoria, and then eventually Vancouver. But yeah, switching languages was pretty hard for myself. Going through all of the technical languages, all of the definitions, especially in community planning, or even within Canada, it's totally different. All of the regulatory language and all of the definitions are different from BC to Ontario, to Alberta and all of that. But yeah, I think I struggled for quite a bit. My first 6 months was totally
learning experience.
Exactly, yeah. But I went to one of the schools in Calgary. I decided to pick up on GIS because I was really into technology, learning skills about how you can use GIS in your daily life as a professional planner or say engineer. So that was really, I would say, a good start for myself to to pick up on my career here in Canada. So yeah, I basically learned everything in there. And then once I landed my first job, I started working as a professional again. And that's where I I would see lots of progress being made since like my day one in Canada and then to this date. So yeah, I probably was working really hard on my communication skills and listening skills and all of that, because like my first landing day, I was trying to order food in, and then
I want that on the menu. You're pointing.
It was so funny. Like I called the guy. He's Vietnamese. He's also barely speaking English.
Yeah.
And both of us are trying to communicate what to order, and then eventually we did.
Everything's going. Yeah, you're
exactly. Yeah.
So how many languages would you say do you still have a little bit of I guess the Chinese and the Russian in your vocabulary?
So I was born. Yeah, I'm coming from one of the largest indigenous nations in Russia. It's called Yakut people.
Okay.
So my first language was my native language, Yakut, and then I picked up on Russian when I was like maybe around 6-7 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, and then eventually I started learning English when I was back in school, and we had really great teachers and real great opportunities out there. So I learned English. Well, it wasn't that great, right? But still, like
the words, you
exactly,
words.
Yeah. I had a good foundation, and then eventually, I went to China. I lived there for almost 2.5 years. Learned some basic Chinese. Had to take an exam in order to get into undergrad school.
Yeah.
So to this day, I speak Russian, Yakut, and English fluently, I would say, and then I have Chinese as a basic, and then a little bit of German, because I once won one of the, I think it was grant, like a summer language course in Stuttgart. So I went there, and it was great. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting then. Yeah. No, I always find that interesting again, because communication, obviously, in our field, again, even just with planning and between planning and engineering, right? Like just getting the ideas across in one language can be tough. But then, like you said, throughout all of your different journeys, I can imagine then having to translate one thing to another thing, and then, like you said, the technical terms, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So now I want to piggyback off that and move now towards your personal experience and your journey. If you can kind of tell me about where you started to work, and then take me through to how you got to Aplin today.
Okay, for sure. So when I was a student back in the time, it was like, I think my second year in my undergrad studies, I just needed to land a co-op position over summertime, and I went to consulting firm, and was eventually employed as a kind of part-time intern / planning technician. That's how I ended up being in planning department, whereas I was supposed to do some civil engineering, but back in the time in my hometown, civil engineering and planning was really interconnected to each other. And what I started to do was like, it was site layout designs, land massing calculation, all of the grading, even landscaping to some point. And then while I was working there, I started being introduced to one of the subdivision layout plans, all of the long-range planning documents like official community plan, zoning bylaw updates, and all of that. And I was like, maybe I should just pursue it as my full-time career as a planner, right? And then I eventually graduated. I got my degree, and then I was employed at the same company, same consulting firm. And I was doing planning work, but at the same time, I also got into my graduate degree, master's program in urban planning. So that's how I got into consulting world. Later on, I also transitioned over to government and public sector back in Russia, right? I was working as a development planner.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I moved to Canada, and I got into this GIS education, right? And then I got my degree. I got employed at the city of Brampton. Was doing infrastructure planning in there, basically leading their GIS kind of data management, day-to-day data management in their initiatives. And then eventually landed a full-time job in GIS in Victoria. That's how I got into BC.
Okay.
And then I eventually was like,
it's a hell of a story, yeah.
I know, it's like long story, long journey. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's really good because like I had so much diverse experiences so far. And I think it's kind of shaped me as a professional to my day to day, right? And then eventually I was like, I want to go back to planning because like I leaned toward too much of GIS. And then I was like, I want to go back to planning, and I got employed at the District of Saanich over in Victoria. And then I moved over to mainland here in Vancouver. And I was working for the city of Coquitlam for a few years. And then eventually I was like, I probably want to go back to consulting because like, the pace and the dynamics of consulting always kind of inspired me. And I was kind of, I wouldn't say bored, but like going through public sector complexities here in Canada, in BC, particularly at the local government level, it's very nuanced. And you got to be so patient and, navigate through all of these challenges. And I was like, I might want to go back to consulting. And then I was reached out basically by a recruiter asking like if you would be interested to come in and interview for this role at Aplin. And that's how I got here. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the difference between municipal, like between working at the government and then, I guess, like you said before, consulting is one's a lot more procedural than kind of what we do as consultants, right? You're able to touch a lot of different things, right? You're doing a lot of different roles versus, I guess, what you were doing with municipalities. So how many times then did you switch back between consulting and government?
So like back in my career back in Russia was like consulting first, government, then I opened up my own consultancy firm, then I moved to Canada.
Yep.
Went to public again, and then consulting eventually right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like 2 times or 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. No, that's definitely an interesting journey, like you said before, even just going from one country to another country and then switching again public. So you're able to see almost, not only were you able to see it in your home country, but then you're able to see kind of the switch then here as well.
Exactly, yeah. And I would say in planning perspective, Russian planning, Canadian planning, quite similar in terms of principles, theory, right? How you're managing the growth. But the most critical part in terms of differences was the regulatory and then the compliance with all of the rules and regulations. Because like planning is being in Russia, it was like regulated on the federal level, and they had like urban planning code. Like same as here, we have say BC building code, right? Yeah. But we don't have planning code here. So planning in BC, it's like, I wouldn't say it's probably like decentralized, right? Because like local governments have so much authority and so much flexibility to adjust to local community needs. Whereas back then it was like more about rules, following those prescriptive context and But I would say like it's really, I feel myself lucky, and happy to be exposed to both sides over here and back in my hometown. So I guess that gives me kind of like an expertise to look from both of the spectrum.
Exactly. You're using your experience from both sides kind of to where it got you to where today, and then obviously to kind of move into the future then.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so now we'll get into the actual, I guess, the meat of the conversation, community planning itself. So if you want to give me, first we'll start with the definition of community planning. How do you define community planning?
Okay. Community planning to myself, I would say, is about long-term processes, initiatives, and opportunities. It basically focuses on questions like how, when, and where we can see the growth happening in our communities, how we can make it happen realistically possible within the next, say, 5, 10, or 20 years from now on. And the word itself, community, it's all about community. You basically work with people who you wouldn't say play, but like work and play with their future lives in terms of like how the plans are going to take shape in the future, how you inform the decision making for, say, council members, and how municipalities are going to go about their strategic directions in the future, right? So to myself, community planning is all about collaboration. It's all about engagement with the public, with the variety of interest groups, with government bodies, and
Awesome. Can you go into how, because obviously planning is one big umbrella and community planning is a part of that. For those that may not be so familiar, can you speak a little bit about the differences then between a community planner, a development planner, and then say, for example, like a housing planner?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Community planners, they usually work on long-term projects, right? Like say examples like official community plans, zoning bylaws, and then you get to the point where you kind of look into a little bit more granular level when you're working, say, on strategies like housing affordability, how to get childcare across the cities, social and economic development of the cities. So that's where you get to see the differences between, say, typical community planner, who would be mostly working on, I would say, policy directions on more strategic level, kind of overarching documents, right?
Yeah.
But basically guide the future growth of the communities and the cities and neighborhoods. Whereas, say, development planners, they work on more of a implementation level, They review site-specific, say, development applications where they have to, I wouldn't say abide, but like look at regulations at local municipalities, say like zoning bylaw or like some policies or objectives in official community plan, and they have to kind of follow it in order to implement those development happening in the current day. So I would define, say, development planners versus community planners.
Yep.
Development is focused on what's happening today up to like, say, 5 years from now, whereas community planners, they look ahead. So 5 to 20, 30 years time horizon. And then you get, say, housing planners or social planners who work on, I would say, policy implementation on a more granular level. They go in depth into analytics. They do lots of research on, say, topics like affordable housing, social development, and all kind of problems like that, like say poverty reduction or like homelessness issues, and they work on those important topics.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
So now the community planning department, I guess, at Aplin is more relatively new. How has your past experience in planning shaped your vision for the community planning with Aplin? And can you speak a little bit on the goals you have kind of for the group that you have here?
Yeah, for sure. Our group is pretty new. Yes, it's been established last year.
Yep.
So we have a few ongoing active projects that we're currently working on with our municipal clients. And I guess that my experience, like having almost 14 years behind my back in different really scenarios, in different environments, settings, and systems, I think that kind of helped me to shape my professional vision to be more diverse and open to flexibilities. Because like I was able to work back in Russia as a planner, here in Canada. I was going through all of this, all the regulatory language, all the legislation changes, even like say 3 years back, looking when I was working at the city of Coquitlam, where, the housing legislation came up from the province, and it was really new, and it kind of changed the way how municipalities work here in terms of development and guiding the growth in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So we had to adjust really quickly, but to myself, it wasn't really new, right? Because like I already knew how that system worked, and I guess I got adjusted a little bit more quicker and was able to support the implementation process a little bit more. I wouldn't say effectively, but like I was just mentally I was ready.
Exactly. Your understanding almost of it. Was
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I aim to do with community planning here at Aplin is basically to have our clients who are ready to move forward with their projects, say whether it's official community plan update or zoning bylaw amendments or some strategies in housing or childcare planning, right? So I would like to create some solutions for them that are, first of all, data driven. They backed up by solid foundational research, and second of all, it's not just being inspired by some kind of innovative ideas, but also looking into achievable goals, right? Those could be implemented on the ground in the future, in the upcoming days, and where like say municipal staff can work on those implementation tasks as soon as we completed those plans. And most importantly, that council and public should and can support and be supportive of.
That they understand kind of what you're looking to put forth, basically.
Exactly, okay. Yeah. So I think like just having worked through the beginning, like starting as a planning tech, looking at all of the subdivision layouts, looking at individual site concepts, I just basically was always on both sides, looking from like above in terms of policy directions, and then being under there, working daily on implementation side.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of helped me to shape my vision, and that's what I'm trying to do with my clients here at Aplin. And yeah, our group is working on a variety of projects, and I'm just looking forward to get people, to get the public interest first of all, right? To engage people around these documents that we're working on.
Yep.
And most importantly, is communication is also one of the key aspects, right? Because you're working on all this technical language, technically challenged concepts, trying to deliver it to, say, council members or, say, to public. It's really important how you communicate those ideas to them so that they understand. Because lots of people just they're not tech savvy, they don't come up, say, from the engineering or planning background, right? And it's just how you put all of this complex information in a easiest and more digestible way as possible.
You're almost translating, like you said before, not to go back to your language, but you're almost translating one document into a way again for another form of people that may not have the technical background.
Exactly.
That you guys have that are working.
Exactly. It just kind of being a translator, not just from language to another language, but like rather just as all of the regulations and all of the rules into simple ways of, here's what's going to happen. Here's how you can contribute to this. And here's what we're going to do with that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So now do you have any specific objectives kind of for your group for the future looking forward?
As I mentioned before, I'm really getting inspired by technology. So I would love to have more projects that we can work on that would be, say planning oriented, but they also would involve the use of, say, GIS technologies as it's basically our new stream in our group that we also offer as a service. We perform GIS analysis. We use it to benefit our planning decision making, to guide the future growth, to run some geospatial analysis, and to basically to tell the story behind it. Because to the point that I had, explaining it in a very simple, user-friendly way, I think it's very, very important. And with the use of GIS and technology, you could basically build tools that can shape, narrative around like why the growth is happening in certain areas and not the others. And then it will be digestible for both council members who basically should approve or not approve certain plans or, documents in place, right? And then the public as well, so they can understand. Because like one of the examples I had recently was like when I was working in Coquitlam, we've been hosting some public engagement workshops and sessions with people. Basically talking about why is the housing legislation has changed, why there are some new rules happening in the area. And lots of people was just, really confused with the language we were using in our official documents. And then we had to go through a lot of collaborative processes with our communication specialists in order to get down to the level of information that can be really digested by just general public, right? Mm-hmm. And it's basically their lives that we're affecting, because like we're working towards the future generations, and then it's really important to stay up to date for all of the people who might be involved in this, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, you want to get the information out there to the people that it actually affects when you're working on it.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. So now through all of the years of experience kind of that you've had, whether you're here, whether again, like you said before, in BC and back in Brampton and Ontario, back home in Russia with all these various roles, can you speak on one of the notable projects that you've worked on, and then why would this one specifically stand out to you with all kind of the years of experience and all the different, aspects of planning and engineering that land development, I should say, that you've touched so far?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Notable project, I think I can just recall one of the recent experiences that when I was, implementing housing legislation changes here in BC. I basically was tasked to complete a assessment of likelihood of redevelopment of rental buildings throughout the city due to these legislative changes. So imagine there is we have OCP, like official community plan, we have zoning bylaw updates, they work on every day and kind of they guide the future development, but then province can come in the way and they ask to change your land uses around, say, transit-oriented areas. Like, for example, if you look at the SkyTrain stations around Metro Vancouver, they've been prescribed to have, I believe, up to 20 stories as right-of-way. And then it just basically gets in tiers, right? Like as farther you move, you basically see like a decline in terms of growth and the heights of the buildings. Yeah. Whereas lots of municipalities here, like in Metro Vancouver, there is like 21 municipality. So each of these municipalities, they had their own zoning bylaws, their own community plans, their own visions for how they guide the growth. Yeah. But then once province stepped in, there was really tricky situation for all of them, because like basically you would be able to see, like usually you would see like permissions of 6-story buildings around, say, the SkyTrain stations, right? Yep. And then now it's the legislations comes in and basically force the governments to implement these changes and allow up to 20 stories. And that basically not just screw up, but kind of like mixed everything in terms of financial models of the cities, how they've been, approving developments, how they was, utilizing density bonusing, how they were using some kind of incentives to get the developments built. But then having all of the changes, it's basically affected a lot of lives of the future residents of the cities. And one of my tasks was, as I mentioned, to analyze where we could see lots of older rental purpose-built buildings that might be redeveloped in, say, upcoming 5 to 10 years because of this legislation changes, right?
Yeah.
So what I used back in the time was looking, first of all, at all of the background reports, all of the documents that were existing back in the day, and then also looking at some data analysis. So I basically decided to utilize GIS in order to see what is really like surrounding those SkyTrain stations, how many buildings actually is there, how many residents could be affected by these legislation changes.
Yep.
So we had to run this complex analysis in order to understand how much exactly of basically people's lives, how many buildings across the city would be affected by this. And eventually we came up with a summary report, having some recommendations, having some, risks around it. And I guess that was notable to myself because I used, first of all, technologies that I really like. And then second of all, I used planning skills that I have. And eventually, I think it became basically a foundational evidence kind of tool for future creation of tenant protection bylaw in the city. So that's one of my notable experiences that I had. And I think whatever is related, technology, planning, research, analysis together, I think that's where I'm excited about in my day-to-day even. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting, again, because from the outside, like a person like myself, again, I work in engineering, right? Mm-hmm. We talk to planners and we speak with planners every day, so we kind of understand, I guess, like just the main, like the gist of it, I guess you could say, almost like the very, very extremely high level. But it's cool to hear that not only then do you bring in, like you said before, the actual analysis data driven, and then you incorporate kind of the actual GIS like the advanced technology portion to kind of come up with all these studies.
Exactly, yeah.
That's really interesting. So now another something that I'd be looking for you to kind of speak upon is, what would be a big learning experience that you've had during your earlier years of planning kind of to get you to where the position you are today? Right.
I think I could just touch on a few experiences that I had throughout both my journey here in Canada and back in Russia as a planner. One of the first one was basically when I was setting up my own consultancy agency. I was like looking for new clients, right? And I was basically doing outreach and trying to find new clients to offer my services to. And then I landed the first discovery meeting. I went there. I was supposed to meet, I believe was their kind of planning head. But eventually, the chief ended up showing up at that meeting. So I was doing my presentation about my services and all of that. And then they had I think there was maybe 4 or 5 people in the room. And then eventually when I was finished and wrapped my presentation and here is my services, here they can be beneficial to you. And then I was just kind of picking at the chief throughout the presentation. And I don't know, the person looked so sad or so disappointed throughout this presentation. I was like, what the heck is happening? Yeah. And then eventually once I was done, she basically almost started yelling at her staff members, asking what the heck is this guy doing here? Yeah. Why is he trying to pitch his services? Why can't you guys do this work? And then eventually I was like, okay, I freaked out, to be honest, right? Because this is my first discovery meeting, and I was trying to set up my consultancy.
Caught really off guard, yeah.
Exactly, I was caught off guard, and I was like, okay, what do I do now? I was trying to calm myself down, and I was I took a pause, I took a deep breath, and I was like, okay, now that if I just go out and kind of leave, that's gonna be embarrassing, right? And then I was like, okay, maybe I just should listen to her first. Maybe ask some follow-up questions why she's concerned about it, and then eventually she talks through her points, why she's concerned and all of that. And then what I applied was kind of active listening, asserting the person that yes, I'm hearing your problems and here's what I can do, what I can offer. So eventually ended up kind of not saying we signed the deal right now and here, but it's just basically exploration of ideas. Here's what you can have with my services and how it can basically put you ahead of other municipalities. And then eventually, I ended up signing that contract. I I think like a month later or something. But that was quite a learning experience for myself in terms of like, you could get to deal with lots of people, a variety of people with different backgrounds, and they can be like, they can act totally unexpected as you would imagine, right? And and then eventually throughout my career in Canada, I also had certain interactions like that with, say, public, with some interested people that were like stakeholders to the projects, right? It was mostly like during public engagement sessions where I would see some kind of situation like that pop up. And one of those also was like one guy was, freaking out and yelling at one of my colleagues. And then I kind of reached out and tried to listen up and, to assert them, like ensure that we hear you, we're not trying to implement the changes right away and here.
Yeah, it's not
right?
going over your head, right? You're
Exactly
actually listening to them.
Yeah, and that person just ended up being someone who was related to planning in some sort of way in his previous career, and now he's retired, and he was like, kind of expressing his concerns, right? And then eventually, when we were talking through it, he learned that my background from Russia and then from Far East. He was like, oh, I was there actually. So he ended up traveling to Russia back in like, I don't know, 70s or 80s. And he had some kind of field trip in there. He had some good memories and, we made some jokes and eventually we ended up having some good conversation and he felt really good about that he being kind of listened to and people heard him. So I guess what I learned through this kind of experiences was like, listen first, acknowledge people's feelings, their thoughts and ideas, and then maybe take a few minutes back and go back and do some research, do some analysis if needed, and then follow up with them, with the outcome of the situation, right? So I guess to myself that was one of the experiences that I was like throughout my career I was just learning on, and then even to this day I wouldn't say I'm like expert in everything, right? Because like there is no single planner who would be really knowledgeable in every aspect of the planning spectrum. So it's just being open and staying flexible and practicing basically active listening.
Yeah, and then I'll speak to the first one. I guess the first experience you had. Yeah, so it's almost like no matter how prepared you are, there are going to be some things that pop up where even if you studied 100 hours for an exam that you should only study 5 hours for, right? An interaction with another human being is going to be different than an interaction with another human being.
Exactly. Yeah.
So be flexible.
Yeah. It's always about that. It's just, to myself, I just try to stay flexible as possible, but at the same time, you're trying to deliver something to the person, then you should do your best to do that. Right. But then eventually if say you don't see any uptake on the other side, you just back off and, let it cool. And you can approach them another time. Yeah.
And then like you said before with the public speaking and that engagement, right? I guess the lesson there is not to be so reactionary, right? To take in, understand what they're saying, right? Take it
exactly.
in. And like even if you don't have the answer at that point, right? Take a second, be like, okay, hey, I'll get back to you. Or you know what I mean? Listen and then go from there.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even like, we could say you can always reach out and come to us individually, right? Outside of this, event, you can come up, we could have a, meaningful conversation and all of that. Or you can always refer them to your management as well, or even council members sometimes, right? Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Now I'd like to end off. It's been a great conversation so far. I've learned a lot for sure about planning. I want to end it off with this one here. What advice would you give to your younger self that's looking to get into the discipline of community planning?
I guess advice to my younger self would be like, don't worry too much. Don't rush the process. Slow down a little bit, do your thing. You cannot simply know everything. And just, staying true to yourself as well, to your values, staying true to public interests, because that's what community planning is about, working for the public, working for the community, along with the community. Practicing active listening, practicing flexibility, and just basically keeping attention to your clients, to your management, to council members. I think that's really important. And and just basically relax and enjoy the journey. Exactly. Be patient and just learn throughout your career. I think I just trying to apply that to myself even to nowadays. I'm still young and I have so many years ahead. So always staying open-minded about new things, and exploring and staying up to date with technology. I think it's really important as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all we have for today. Again, I'd like to thank Max for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and experience. And thanks to our listeners of the workshop by Aplin. Stay tuned for our next episode and have a great day.
Thanks, Julian.